Hello, this is John from caveofprogramming.com. In this tutorial we're going to take a look at using function pointers. And we're going to take a look at actually passing some code to a function. So I've got here a vector with some strings in it, just numbers spelt out. And supposing I want to count how many of the strings in this vector match some criteria. So for example, I might want to say, tell me how many strings in this function have a length of 3. So I'm going to need some kind of function here that can test one string and say yes it matches the criteria or no it doesn't. So I've implemented this function here, bool match, which accepts a single string, and in this case I'm making it return true if the size of this string is 3 characters and false otherwise. Or I could do this instead and comment that out. This line returns true if the test string is equal to the string TWO2 and false if it doesn't. So you can have whatever criteria you like in there. They can be as complicated as you want, and you can put it in a little function like that. So of course now I could call match, and I could pass it a string like let's pass it 1, not even using the vector just yet. And if I run that, I expect that to return true because one has 3 characters in it. So it's returning 1, which we saw in the beginner's course was equivalent to true. And if I'll get 0 if it doesn't match this string. Now, how can I apply this to every element in this vector? Well, there is actually a handy function in C++ to do that. So if you include algorithm and you say you're using standard namespace, you can actually call the function COUNTIF and pass it a iterator to the start of the range that you want to check. So I'll start checking from the beginning. Pass it an iterator to the end of the range you want to check. So I'll check the whole vector here, text.end. So those are both iterators. And pass it a function, a pointer to a function that returns true or false and accepts an element of whatever type of thing is in your vector, and that definition of course matches this. That's what that does. So this will achieve the same, well, it will achieve the purpose that I have in mind here, and it will give us the count of strings, the number of strings in this vector that have 3 characters in them, and that's 4. So we've got here 1, 2, 3 and 4. So there are 4 strings in there that have 3 characters that match this. But what if you want to implement your own version of COUNTIF? So that's obviously going to be a bit useless because there's already one. But you might want to implement some kind of situation in your program where you want to pass in a block of code, and that's really what we want to look at here. So just for kind of a way of practicing this, let's implement our own version of COUNTIF. So I'm not going to make it generic for all kinds of vectors or anything. I'm not going to mess about with iterators. I'm purely just going to implement a function that can check lists of strings for a criteria or criterion that I supply in the form of a function. So I'll create a function here called let's make it, it's going to return in, that's going to be the number of matches, and I'll call it count strings, let's say, and we can make it take a reference to a vector of strings if we just want to work with vectors of strings here. Let's call this text, and I'm going to pass it, I want to pass it a pointer to a function that can then perform the actual check. So as we saw in the last tutorial, what we do is, so that the function is going to return bool, so we're going to type bool. It's going to be, we need a variable name for this function pointer. I could call it match. I've already called this match, but it doesn't matter, it's a different scope. Or I could call it something completely different. It really doesn't matter. Let's maybe call it test. So I need to put the test in brackets and prefix it with a star like this. Whoops, rather like that. And then we need to put 2 brackets after it and put the parameters to that function in here. So that's going to be a string, which we'll call, actually this is going to get confusing because I called this test. Let's call this match. So let's make the variable name match and call the string test. So this is a function pointer. This is just a variable which can point to a function, and the variable is called match. And the function that it points to has to return bool and has to take a string called, well, it doesn't have to take a string called anything, it has to take one string parameter. Okay, so now we've got that, we can iterate through the function. And actually the rest of this is probably, well, yeah, it's pretty straightforward, so we're not going to see anything new here. So if you want to pause the video at this point and have a go and see if you can do this based on what you've seen so far, that would certainly be a good exercise. So I'm going to show you now how we could do that. So we could iterate through the vector, several ways of iterating through a vector. There's at least two good ways in C++98. C++11 adds an even better way. But let's just do it like this. Use a kind of index-based loop, and we're going to say, like, if we get a string, we can say text. So text I is the string we're looking at, and if that's well, we need to apply this match function to it. So let's say if match text I, and then we could iterate some sort of a count. So let's maybe call this int tally equals 0, and I'm going to say in here, if we get a match, we're just going to increment tally like that, and then finally we can return tally at the end. So now I've got my own version of COUNTIF, although it only works for vectors of strings, and I can say here cout count strings, pass in the vector, and pass in my pointer to my match function up here. So we just need the name of the function, and then it's output whatever count strings returns, and we expect it to match up with what COUNTIF returns. So I've got some error here. I've just missed off a bracket. There we go. Let's run this and see what we get. So we've got 4 again, so we've counted the number of strings that match this criteria. So worth having a go at that yourself, or if you can think of any other situation where you might want to pass a block of code to a function. For example, if you don't mind looking up some kind of stuff on how to do timings in C++, you can implement a function that times the code that's passed to it. Something like that, anything you can think of really. It's well worth practicing this, because if you are going to implement a pointer to a function, very high chance the whole point in doing that is to pass, is so that you can pass a block of code in a function to another function. That's really kind of one of the main things that that function pointers are used for. Okay, so I'll leave it there for this tutorial. Until next time, happy coding.